I always suspected my father would someday find a new way to disappoint me. I just never imagined he'd try to sell me. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was balancing inventory records for our family's struggling shipping business. Years of bad decisions had pushed the company to the edge of bankruptcy, and somehow every one of those bad decisions belonged to my father. He burst into my office wearing the grin he usually reserved for disasters disguised as opportunities. "Good news," he announced. Whenever he said those words, I immediately prepared for bad news. "What happened now?" I asked. He dropped a stack of legal documents onto my desk. "We're saved." I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. Then back at the papers. By the third page, I realized I wasn't reading a business contract. I was reading my own future. My father had signed an agreement promising my hand in marriage to one of the wealthiest widowers in the colony. For money. A lot of money. Enough money, apparently, to make him forget basic parenting principles. "You sold me?" I asked slowly. "I prefer the term arranged." "You accepted 300,000 credits. Details. Those details are literally listed under payment." He waved dismissively. "You'll thank me later." "No, I'm fairly certain I'll be reporting you later." That wiped the smile off his face for almost 3 entire seconds. Then it returned. The man was immune to shame. According to the documents, the prospective husband was a wealthy alien businessman whose wife had died several years earlier. He owned vast properties, shipping routes, and enough investments to buy half the colony if he felt bored. The agreement described him as respectable, successful, and influential. It also described me as if I were livestock. I was furious. My father, meanwhile, was already discussing how he planned to spend his advance payment. A new hovercar. Luxury vacations. An imported fountain for the front yard. We didn't even have a front yard. We lived in an apartment. When I pointed that out, he said he'd buy a yard first. That was the moment I decided professional legal assistance was necessary. By afternoon, I was sitting across from the sharpest lawyer in the district. He listened quietly while reading every page. His expression became more concerned with each paragraph. Finally, he set the documents down. "Your father may have made a very expensive mistake." Those were my favorite words of the day. The lawyer began asking questions about the widower. To my surprise, everything I learned painted a picture completely different from what I expected. The wealthy alien wasn't some arrogant old tyrant looking for a young bride. In fact, multiple people described him as polite, intelligent, and almost painfully decent. Apparently, he rarely attended social events, and spent most of his time managing charitable projects funded by his late wife's estate. The more I learned, the less I disliked him. The more I disliked my father. A week later, I finally met the widower during a formal meeting arranged by our families. To my surprise, he looked just as uncomfortable as I felt. While my father talked nonstop about financial arrangements, the widower mostly stared at his coffee with the expression of someone trapped inside a very strange nightmare. At one point our eyes met. He gave an awkward smile. I accidentally smiled back. For a brief moment, we looked less like future spouses and more like hostages. The meeting ended with my father celebrating what he called the greatest deal of his life. The widower left looking exhausted. As everyone prepared for the upcoming wedding ceremony, my lawyer requested a private meeting. His voice was unusually serious. "I've discovered something interesting," he said. "What kind of interesting?" "The kind hidden inside a dead woman's will." I blinked. "What does that mean?" A slow smile appeared on his face. "It means your father's plan may not survive the wedding." And for the first time since this madness began, I started looking forward to the ceremony. The wedding day arrived with all the grace and dignity of a cargo shuttle crash. The grand estate was packed with guests, expensive decorations, and enough floral arrangements to bankrupt a small moon. My father was having the best day of his life. Unfortunately, the rest of us were there too. He floated through the reception hall shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and behaving as though he personally had achieved something noble instead of negotiating his daughter's future like a used transport vehicle. Several guests heard him bragging about his financial genius. He enjoyed repeating the payment amount. Loudly. Repeatedly. To anyone unfortunate enough to be standing nearby. At one point he cornered an elderly businessman and spent 20 minutes explaining how he intended to retire before the end of the month. The businessman eventually escaped by pretending to choke on a pastry. I considered trying the same strategy. Meanwhile, the groom remained surprisingly calm. Unlike my father, he didn't appear excited about the ceremony. If anything, he looked slightly embarrassed by the entire situation. While guests mingled, he approached me carrying 2 glasses of sparkling fruit juice. "I thought you might need this," he said. "Is it strong enough to erase memories?" He laughed. "No, but I can ask the kitchen if they have industrial cleaning chemicals." That caught me off guard. For the first time since this nightmare began, I genuinely smiled. As the afternoon continued, we spent more time talking. And the more we talked, the stranger the situation became. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't controlling. He wasn't even particularly interested in discussing marriage. Instead, we talked about travel, books, food, embarrassing childhood stories. He admitted that he'd once crashed a luxury shuttle into his own warehouse because he accidentally confused the navigation system with the entertainment console. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. "My father once invested our savings into self-cleaning pet rocks." The widower blinked. "Pet rocks? They were supposed to clean themselves. Did they?" "No. But they were excellent at being rocks." He laughed so hard nearby guests started staring. For a few minutes, the wedding disappeared. The pressure disappeared. The contract disappeared. There were simply 2 people enjoying each other's company. That realization was surprisingly dangerous. Because I liked him. And I wasn't supposed to. Across the room, my father continued celebrating money he hadn't fully received yet. He had already ordered a luxury vehicle, reserved a vacation suite, purchased designer clothing. Apparently, he had also attempted to buy a decorative fountain despite still not owning a house. The fountain company had accepted the order anyway. Greed, I discovered, attracts other forms of stupidity. As the ceremony time approached, guests moved toward the main hall. The officiant prepared his documents. The atmosphere grew more formal. Yet something felt unusual. My lawyer stood near the rear entrance calmly checking his watch. Again. And again. And again. Nearby, the town sheriff leaned against a wall with his arms crossed. Neither man looked nervous. They looked patient. Like hunters waiting beside a trap. My father didn't notice. He was too busy calculating future spending plans. The widower noticed. So did I. Our eyes met across the room. Neither of us spoke. But we were both thinking the same thing. Something was about to happen. The officiant stepped forward. Guests settled into their seats. Silence spread through the hall. The ceremony officially began. Then, just before the first legal declaration could be read, a calm voice echoed through the room. "Before this proceeds, there is one document that must be addressed." Every head turned. My lawyer stood slowly from his chair. He held a thick folder in one hand. My father's confident smile immediately faded. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Then he looked directly at the groom. "I believe it's time everyone heard your late wife's final will." And suddenly the entire room became very, very interested. The silence that followed my lawyer's announcement was so complete that I could hear someone nervously chewing a pastry in the back row. My father laughed first. It was the kind of laugh people make when they have absolutely no idea they're standing on a trapdoor. "A will?" he said. "What does that have to do with a wedding?" My lawyer smiled. "Quite a lot, actually." The groom sighed heavily and rubbed his forehead. That reaction alone told me he already knew what was coming. Guests exchanged confused glances as the lawyer opened the folder and removed several certified documents. The officiant stepped aside. Nobody seemed interested in the wedding anymore. Everyone wanted the drama. The lawyer cleared his throat. Several years before her passing, the late wife established a protective inheritance clause. My father crossed his arms. So? The lawyer continued. The clause was designed to prevent fortune hunters, opportunists, and manipulative individuals from exploiting her husband's wealth after her death. A few guests nodded approvingly. My father rolled his eyes. Still not understanding. The clause states that any individual who attempts to arrange, pressure, force, negotiate, purchase, sell, manipulate, or financially benefit from a marriage involving her husband automatically forfeits any financial compensation connected to that arrangement. The room became very quiet. My father's confidence flickered. Just a little. Then he laughed again. That's ridiculous. The lawyer turned another page. It becomes even more interesting. At that exact moment, the sheriff walked toward the main entrance. Without saying a word, he closed the massive doors. Then he locked them. The loud metallic click echoed through the hall. Every head turned. "What are you doing?" my father demanded. The sheriff calmly inserted the key into his pocket. "Collecting witness statements." The panic started immediately. My father looked from the locked doors to the lawyer. Then to the groom. Then back to the lawyer. His face began changing colors at impressive speed. "Wait," he said. "What witness statements?" "The kind involving fraud investigations." Now the panic spread from my father to several relatives who had enthusiastically helped him negotiate the deal. The lawyer remained perfectly calm. "As required by the will, any attempt to profit from a forced marriage invalidates all payments, transfers, gifts, and contractual benefits associated with the arrangement." My father pointed accusingly. "I didn't force anyone." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "No? Of course not. You accepted payment. That's different. You signed legal documents. That's business. You described your daughter as part of the agreement. That's—" He stopped. Too late. Several guests winced. The sheriff immediately wrote something down. My father noticed. His confidence evaporated. "What are you writing?" "Your statement." "I wasn't making a statement." "You just did." The sheriff kept writing. The groom looked away, clearly trying not to laugh. I was trying too. I was failing. Spectacularly. My father grew desperate. "I was helping my daughter." The lawyer nodded. "Excellent. Please explain how accepting 300,000 credits helped her." My father opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Then made the catastrophic mistake of continuing. "Because the money was already deposited into my account." The room exploded with murmurs. The sheriff wrote faster. My father realized what he had just admitted. His eyes widened. "Oh no." "Oh yes," the lawyer replied. One by one, witnesses began confirming details. A business associate described hearing my father boast about the payment. A neighbor described him celebrating the deal weeks before the ceremony. Another witness revealed that my father had repeatedly referred to the marriage as the easiest money I've ever made. Every statement tightened the legal noose. Meanwhile, the groom remained silent. Patient. Almost amused. Finally, my father turned toward him. "You knew about this?" The wealthy widower nodded. "My late wife wrote that clause herself." "You let this happen?" "I tried to cancel the arrangement 3 times. That was true. I remembered hearing rumors. My father had ignored every warning because he was too busy imagining luxury vacations. The lawyer closed the folder. "Based on the evidence and multiple witness statements, the compensation agreement is void." My father's shoulders slumped. "The money?" "Returned." "The gifts?" "Returned." "The benefits?" "Void." "The vacation reservations?" The lawyer smiled. "Especially the vacation reservations." For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the part where he sold me. The sheriff stepped forward. "We'll also need to discuss potential fraud charges." My father sank into a chair. Completely defeated. The wedding was effectively over. The scheme had collapsed. The fortune was gone. Years of greed had detonated in under 15 minutes. And then, while everyone was still staring at the wreckage, the groom turned toward me. His expression was warm, gentle, and surprisingly hopeful. "Well," he said, "now that we're both officially free from this disaster, would you like to have dinner sometime?" Suddenly, the room became quiet for a very different reason. For several seconds, nobody said a word. My father looked horrified. The sheriff looked entertained. My lawyer looked victorious. And I was staring at the wealthy alien widower who had somehow managed to ask me on a date in the middle of a legal disaster. The timing should have been terrible. Instead, it was strangely perfect. I laughed first. Then he laughed. A moment later, half the room joined us. The tension that had filled the estate all afternoon finally disappeared. "You're asking me out now?" I said. He shrugged. "Technically, the wedding is cancelled." "Fair point. And this is probably the least awkward moment we've had since meeting." I considered that. Unfortunately, he was right. Our entire relationship had begun with contracts, arguments, lawyers, and one remarkably greedy father. A normal dinner sounded refreshing. "I'd like that," I replied. His smile immediately brightened. Across the room, my father groaned dramatically. Nobody paid attention. For once in his life, he wasn't the center of the universe. The following months turned out far better than either of us expected. Without contracts hanging over our heads, we actually got to know each other. We explored nearby colonies together, shared meals, spent hours discussing books, business, travel, and occasionally making fun of the absurd circumstances that had introduced us. The more time we spent together, the easier everything became. His kindness wasn't an act. His sense of humor wasn't forced. And despite controlling a fortune large enough to impress entire planets, he remained one of the most grounded people I had ever met. One evening, while walking through one of his late wife's memorial gardens, he told me the full story behind the inheritance clause. Apparently, she had been brilliant. She loved practical jokes almost as much as she loved protecting the people she cared about. Before her passing, she had worried that opportunists might eventually target her husband. So she created the clause. Not only as protection, but as a final joke. Anyone greedy enough to chase easy money would ultimately destroy themselves. The more I learned about her, the more I admired her. "She sounds incredible," I said. "She was," he replied. Then he smiled. "And she'd be laughing very hard right now." I had to agree. Meanwhile, my father's reputation never recovered. News of the failed wedding spread through the colony faster than a viral holo video. Within weeks, everyone knew the story. Every detail. Every confession. Every terrible decision. People began treating him like a walking cautionary tale. Children joked about hiding their allowance before he could sell it. Business owners refused to discuss contracts without asking whether he planned to auction off additional family members. Even the decorative fountain company sent him a refund note that included the phrase, "Please refrain from purchasing infrastructure before purchasing property." That letter became famous. The sheriff framed a copy in his office. The lawyer claimed it was the funniest legal document he had ever seen. A year later, our lives looked completely different. My father had finally learned that greed comes with consequences. The sheriff still enjoyed retelling the story whenever he needed entertainment. My lawyer continued reminding everyone that he had technically saved a wedding by destroying it. And the alien widower was no longer simply a widower. He was the man I loved. The man who had become my closest friend long before becoming anything more. When he finally proposed, there were no contracts. No negotiations. No payments. No schemes. Just a quiet evening beneath glowing stars and a simple question asked with genuine sincerity. This time my answer came easily. The wedding that followed was small, joyful, and completely voluntary. As I stood beside him surrounded by friends and laughter, I couldn't help thinking about how everything had started. My father had tried to sell my future for money. Instead, his greed had exposed his own corruption, destroyed his plans, and accidentally introduced me to the love of my life. Somewhere, I was certain the late wife who wrote that brilliant clause was still getting the last laugh. And honestly, she had earned it.